I'm sure that by now we've all seen the new cavalry commanders, Belisarius Prime and Margaret, and I'm sure people are more disappointed in Belisarius, especially because he doesn't have AoE. So in today's video, I'm actually going to tell you the silver lining to Belisarius and what he does mean for the game, because I think Belisarius is a good commander. So if you're interested in why I think Belisarius is good for the meta and why people, especially free-to-players and low spenders, should be very happy he was released or is going to release, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now, let's start off with the first thing about Belisarius that I think is really good, and it's the fact he doesn't have AoE. I know I'm about to be berated in the comments. Maybe my channel will get deleted for saying that, but the fact he doesn't have AoE is a good thing. Belisarius doesn't need AoE. The in-game meta doesn't even need AoE. When we look at the amount of AoE commanders in the game, it is just ridiculous. I mean, the current best 3 March Archer murder ball, 4 out of the 6 commanders have AoE in their kit. For infantry, the best 2 March murder ball, 3 out of the 4 commanders would have AoE in their kit. The amount of AoE on the open field right now is just stupidly high, and most people will notice if you're in a murder ball that's even slightly outnumbered, they just get a huge advantage because they're going to pummel you with AoE. Your marchers are going to take tons of AoE damage, and I've noticed personally in my KVK as a medium, maybe even a low spender, you would say, I was taking tons of sev wounds, like ridiculous amounts, without even hitting my opponents. I had just walked into my murder ball, and that was it. You may have seen in my live streams, my Henry went from a full HP march to a yellow march from only AoE. I wasn't even attacked by anyone. It was just being hit by AoE. Happened to my Zulang Herman, happened to my Boudica Shobani Pal. So I think AoE right now is a bit out of control. I think Lilith is trying to slow down the amount of AoE. That's certainly something I think that's going to happen over this coming year. I wouldn't be surprised if infantry get another single target commander similar to Gorgo. If archers get a single target commander like Boudica, none of that would be too surprising to me. And I think it would be healthy to balance out the amount of AoE there is currently in the meta, because with double AoE commanders like Joan Prime and Herman, and AoE commanders like Zulang and Liu Chu, you're just going to get wrecked by those commanders. So I think slowing down AoE, making it a little bit more of a skill-based meta rather than RNG, because if you get hit by AoE, you're going to get a bad trade, is definitely something Lilith is probably aiming to do over this coming year. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we see less AoE, and in my opinion, I think it's good for the game. That's just my opinion, and I think Belisarius in that terms was also a good move. Another thing he does really well is he can counter archer commanders. I mean, Belisarius is up there with one of the better archer commander countering, at least. He can destroy Zulang with Herman from the reports that I've seen in the tester, for what that's worth. He can do very good against Boudica Shobani Pal, which is probably the best 1v1 archer march, and he just destroys Henry with YSG. Not to mention, he is arguably a little bit of a better upgrade to William for whale players, because he's going to improve your swarming, which means we may see a less dominant garrison meta as well. Even though we are seeing a new garrison, I think that Gorgo was a little bit overpowered. So if we see a less dominant garrison, because this new swarming march can destroy them, that would be very good. And obviously, they can also swarm rallies, but there are some anti-swarm rallies out there, like Henry Nebu, for example, or Attila Takeda, which even though they're not meta at all, they are good for stopping swarmers. So you can still rally without being swarmed, but technically you can't garrison without being swarmed, because you can't put an anti-swarm garrison. That's just a normal garrison. So definitely, I think him countering a lot of the meta stuff right now, Belisarius Prime, once he releases, will be a very nice thing, and he's going to shift up that meta a little bit. Even though he isn't going to be an absolute meta open field commander, he will still counter the archer commanders. That's not going to change, and he will still do pretty good against garrisons when he's swarming, and even pretty good against rallies when he's swarming. So Belisarius is kind of balancing out that meta a little bit more, especially since really, right now, all 3 troop types are balanced. Mostly, archers, cavs, and infantry are very close. And if you give infantry a slightly stronger commander like Belisarius, it will pretty much put every single troop type on par. I think cavs, infantry, and archers will almost be completely equal in field strength once you see someone like a Belisarius Prime added into the mix, especially when you start looking at 3 to 4 marchers. That's when Belisarius really evens it out even more, because of course with 2 or 3 marchers, archers and infantry have way more AoE, it makes them way more overpowered. But when you look 4, 5 marchers of one troop type, which is more rare, there's a lot less AoE or a lot more AoE between both troop types, which just equals it out. So Belisarius is definitely going to be pretty good in balancing the meta, making the troop types just that little bit more equal, and he's not too overpowered where he shoots Cavs to the top, but he's not too weak where it makes Cavs way weaker than the other troops. The next thing that makes Belisarius very powerful, and this is something that we've seen with other commanders like William, is the fact that even if you don't own or don't expertise or don't even unlock Belisarius, you still benefit from a Belisarius on the open field. Belisarius' debuff is an instant trigger. If someone is just hitting your opponents with a Belisarius, that expertise debuff is going to trigger. You're going to deal more damage, your march is going to get better trades, and it's all around just going to make you do better on the open field. So similar to how William works, where this is just a random trigger, you don't have to throw active skills, it doesn't necessarily have to line up with your marches. And because of that, you'll notice Belisarius Prime is still going to do very well for people who don't even have him, because some people are going to unlock him, some people will expertise him, and you're going to see him on the open field, there is no doubt about that. So Belisarius Prime is actually going to even help the lower spenders and free-to-players who don't get him, because they can still benefit from him. Unlike other commanders where even Boudica Prime, even though she's got a debuff right here that technically will improve everyone's trades, it is tied to her active skill, which means it's going to be weirdly timed against your marches with their skill damage. But Belisarius, instant debuff, you instantly benefit. Everyone that's swarming that target gets the same benefit, so in those group situations, you will be trading better usually just because Belisarius is there, and even though that means you will take more damage when someone else uses a Belisarius against you, on average it should be a slightly better trade on your side unless you're getting swarmed a lot, because as a lower spender free to play, you're probably staying behind the whaley marches and just trying to get those pot shot attacks on your opponent. So Belisarius Prime is more of what I want to call a generous commander, where he shares a bit more than he does take, even similar to Herman Prime. I mean, Herman Prime's skill damage buff and poison effects are always nice, but they're also benefiting your kingdom more than they are really benefiting yourself, because you can't deal enough AoE damage to kill a march by yourself unless you're a whale, really, and Herman Prime is going to allow those other players to deal more AoE damage and get better trades. That's really what he does, and I think Belisarius Prime does a similar effect, where he's going to allow you to get a better trade, because you're just dealing more all damage, which is always a nice thing to have. Now, these next 2 points are fairly interlinked, but the first one is Belisarius Prime is more of a niche commander, and you may think, why is that good for the game? Wouldn't you want a commander that everyone expertises? Well, the answer is no. Something everyone has complained about, even myself, is the fact that there is too much power creep in Rise of Kingdoms. First you get Zulang, then you get Liu Chu like 3 months later, who has a better AoE. Stuff like this is just power creep that is not fun. I mean, no one likes having their commanders become rubbish after a few years, and I think Belisarius Prime is the exact thing we all wanted. This is where he really becomes one of the better commanders for the game, because when you look at Belisarius Prime's kit, there's nothing in there that's game-breaking. He's a good commander, he's a strong commander, he's stronger than some of the older commanders, but he isn't ridiculously powerful. He's not like the jump of Nevsky when Nevsky was first added to the game that pretty much shifted the whole entire game meta into this new mythical commander stage. It's nowhere even near that, and that's obviously a good thing. No one wants the power creep at the speed it was going at to continue. If Lilith is going to continue releasing commanders as often as they do, it is probably best that we see some commanders that most players can skip. I mean, Belisarius is great for the whale players. It's going to improve your 7 march swarm to a ridiculous level, but for most lower spenders free-to players running 2-3 marches, ignore him. He's not even worth your time unless the in-game testing changes that. So when we look at a Belisarius on an open field situation from a pure investment standpoint for free-to-play low spenders, he's great because you've got another chance to save your gold heads so that when a new commander does release into Rise of Kingdoms, you're in a very good position. You can expertise that new commander, you can get the good trades, and you're not just blindsided with this OP commander, because I mean, Zulang was released, the best archer commander pretty much of all time, and then they just went and slapped you with Liu Chu like 3 months later, and everyone's like, whoa, where'd this come from? That's crazy, insane power creep. But then we've had a nice silent time since the release of Herman Prime, one of the, again, more overpowered archer commanders. We had engineering, most players can skip that, and now we've had a strong but not overpowered cav commander that if you've got a William in your murder ball and you've got already 4 cavalry commanders, you can really skip. So this is going to allow players to get that time to gain some gold heads, prepare for the next commanders to release, and that means they can choose to invest in maybe the next cav commander cycle. Maybe they get an infantry commander soon and a new cav commander. It allows newer players in the game to catch up to the current meta. Stuff like that is always really good. So I think Belisarius, because he is a little bit more niche, is allowing people to pretty much become a lot closer to the current meta commanders rather than becoming further and further away. I mean, even as a pure archer account, I was struggling to keep up with the current number of archer commanders just because of how strong they really were. So I think that the less overpowered commanders we see, the better for the current meta of the game. So less power creep is always good, and I think Belisarius does almost embody that pretty well. Now, the last thing about Belisarius that is definitely very good is he's got a lot of future implications for Rise of Kingdoms. A lot of stuff we could see coming in the near future that we're all going to benefit from. And of course, I spoke about the less power creep, but I think that the other thing is we may see more commanders that are a little bit more sharing. I think that's a weird way to put that, but commanders like Hermann Prime who give everybody a fairly good benefit, because yes, Boudica's definitely benefiting everyone, but not as much. I think we may see more commanders where they're similar to Belisarius Prime, they're dropping those active skills, but it's only going to benefit you a little bit. You're mainly benefiting off the helping your entire murderable. Stuff like that is really nice, and I think that's good for the future of the game. We may also be entering what I like to call a stagnant commander cycle, and this is a little bit difficult to understand, but once I explain it will make a lot of sense, and it is we will start seeing commanders that are not as overpowered, and I think the best way to put this is CJ right here. We started off the video looking at him, and it's for a very simple reason. CJ is the embodiment of a Belisarius Prime, just about 3 years older. When CJ released, he was a good commander. There's nothing overpowered in his kit, there's nothing bad in his kit, it just was all around fairly strong, and even nowadays it's actually not the worst. And so CJ was the best example of what I like to call a stagnant commander. If you were an infantry main, you max CJ. I mean, it made complete sense. You max him, you run him on the open field, he's a good commander. If you're a whale, you max him, run him on the open field, he's a good commander. But if you were a free-to-play low spender, you skip CJ, you continued running your, I think it was Guan and Leo at the time, or Guan and Alex. So CJ was the best example of a stagnant commander, and there was even one for the cavalry around a similar time period, and I think that was Chandragupta. Chandragupta is a very good example of a little bit more of a stagnant commander, because he's a good commander for Wales. I mean, he's got a really good debuff, he's got good damage and stuff like that, but he wasn't as overpowered as some of the other commanders. For example, we had Attila Decatur in the game at the time who were much more meta. William as a very good example. Saladin was a lot more meta at the time. Even Zhang Yu, who came not too long after, was much more meta, even at the same time. I think Chandragupta with Zhang Yu released at the exact same time period. So Chandragupta was the pretty good example of a commander who is not as overpowered as other commanders, and it makes him more of a stagnant commander that you can skip and wait for the next commander cycle for the commanders that you do like. And one final example with the archers, we saw Gilgamesh and Amarnatori. They were stagnant commanders once again. Amarnatori Artemisia, really overpowered if you're an archer main, otherwise completely useless. Gilgamesh, really good if you're an archer main, otherwise completely useless. So these stagnant commanders are very good for the health of the game, because you're able to skip that meta because they're more niche. That's why I said Belisarius being niche is a really good thing, and I think that releasing one of those niche commanders every now and again is going to put everybody in a much better position, where it's not like, oh, all these meta commanders are flying out constantly, shifting up the meta constantly, changing everything, needing full heavy investments. It's more like, I could invest in that commander if I'm more of a main for this troop type. I could invest in them if I'm a whale. Otherwise, I don't really need them. They're kind of a small optimization to my murderable. I may as well wait for something a little bit bigger. So having these commanders which are not too overpowered is good for Rise of Kingdoms, even though cav mains are like, I want AoE, we really do want high damage, we want to be meta. Sometimes you can't give everyone meta for the overall health of the game. So I think cavalry right now, they're in a good position, they're not weak, and Belisarius was an overall good addition, not only to cav mains and cav players, but also he's a really good addition just to the health of Rise of Kingdoms and the possible future of the game. Because if we see every now and again a commander like Belisarius, it's a very good break for players to pretty much just work on another troop type, gather up some equipment, save up those gold heads, save up some gems, something that we all do like to do, and even though it's not as fun and exciting as a new overpowered commander, it is something that is just good for the health of the game. So overall, I think Belisarius is a very good commander to be adding to Rise of Kingdoms, and he's definitely going to help with the biggest issue in my opinion, and that was the ridiculous speed of power creep. Now, if you enjoyed today's video and you don't want to kill me just yet after everything that I said, do please consider subscribing to the channel. I try to provide some views on Rise of Kingdoms that are not normally provided by other channels, and yes, I know other people have mentioned Belisarius was good for the game for similar reasons, but this is a video I've been wanting to make for quite a while, so do consider subscribing. I try to be fully honest with what I think of the game at the moment. I try and be fully honest about what is good for the game and what is bad, and I also do as many guides as I can for whatever commanders may be releasing. So if you want to get the best guides you can, if you want to get as much advice on the current position of the game as you can, consider subscribing to the channel. You can always unsubscribe and it's very much appreciated. To all the people who are currently subscribed, a massive thank you, and to all the people who just subscribed as well, an even bigger thank you to you. Now I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.